This tutorial, we're going to texture map the rocket we created. I'm going to start by shift selecting the pieces of the model. I'll right click and choose Assign New Material. I'm going to choose a blend so it's a shiny surface. And then I'm going to follow the color node out here on the right. And then from the Create Render node, I'm going to click on Checker. And you should see this checkerboard pattern. If you don't, right-click inside your viewport and hit 6 on the keyboard to show textures. Now, we're going to be using UV Texture Editor, so I'm going to hold down Command-Shift, and I'm going to go to UV at the top of the user interface. I'm going to choose UV Editor, and you'll see a green box with a checkerboard pattern in the middle of it. Now we're going to go and we're going to arrange all 3 of these in the corner of the UV Texture Editor, and we'll apply a scale and planar mapping to them. Now the body itself is fine. We don't have to do anything else with that. Some shapes in Maya will automatically generate the appropriate UV map. The only problem with this one is perhaps these checkers could be a little square. So I'm going to go over to the UV Editor. And in the UV Editor, next to the little horseshoe magnet at the top, I'm going to click on the blue box. It's going to give me a blue film inside my UV map. I'm going to right-click and choose Shell in the UV Editor. I'll select the shell that's associated with the body. I'll hit R to get the scale tool. And I'll go in and I'll start to scale this so that they're a little bit more like a perfect square. Now, the ones I'm really just concerned about are the ones that will appear in the middle of the rocket body. You can see they taper as they go to either end. So once I've got something close to what I'd like, I'll pull it into the corner here. And I'm going to scale this down just a little bit because I'm going to need to make room for the UV maps associated with the propeller and the wing. I'm going to select my object mode, and then I'm going to select the wing of the rocket. And I want to use planar mapping on this, and the vertice that is in question is the blue vertex that is pointing out from the surface on which I want to plot the texture. I'm going to hold down the space bar. I'm going to go to UV, Planar, and I'm going to the menu. And in there I'll choose Z. And I'll hit Apply. Now a virtual tool appears. And if I click on the red T in the lower left-hand corner, I can now use the transform tools to scale this appropriately. Now, I'm not worried about the scale of this grid or this checkerboard pattern, but I do want them to appear square. Once I've got them square, I'm going to go to the UV Editor itself. And the UV Editor, I will scale that down. And I'm going to move it outside the checkerboard pattern like so. We'll put that in its place in the corner of the grid once we've plotted a UV map for the propeller as well. So I'll go to the prop or the propeller. I'm going to select it, go back to the object mode. And because I left my planar map options up, I can now choose the planar map option that I want, and that's going to be Y. Y is perpendicular to the surface in which I would like the texture to fall. I'll click on Y and I'll hit Apply. Once again, I'm going to click on the red T and I'm going to scale this so that I'm looking at perfect squares in the checker pattern. Once I have something that is appropriate, I'll go to the editor once again. And in the editor, I'll get my scale tool by hitting R, and I'll scale that down so that I know I'm going to be able to fit it in with the other UV maps. Now that I've got all 3 of these plotted, I'm going to return to the viewport, right-click and choose Object Mode from my geometry, and once again, I'm going to Shift Select those 3 elements. And here they are in my editor. Now the checkerboard here at this point is a distraction because we already scaled it the way we wanted when we introduced the maps. In the UV editor, there is a small mountain peak icon with a little bit of a planet in blue. I'm going to click on that just to hide it for now. Now my objective is to get the rocket wing and the propeller into this corner. I will right-click, choose Shell, select the wing, hit W to get my Move tool, and I'll pull that over here. I'll click on the prop, and I think I'll put this up here, and I will rotate it. I'll hit E, and I'll rotate it so it's vertical. Now there's one last thing we're going to do. We're going to go to the tip of this rocket body. So I'm going to go to my orthographic views, and in my side view I'll right click and choose face, and I'm going to select just the faces at the very tip. So I'll click and drag the ones I want, and then I'll hold down the space bar. I will go to Edit Mesh, and I will choose Extract. Now when we first extract our piece, it leaves it in the editing mode. You can see that I can select these faces individually again. I'm going to right click and choose Object Mode, and then I'll select that piece of geometry that's been separated out and center the pivot. Now if I look in my UV editor, it's in the form of a strip. Now what I'd like to do though is I want to put two red circles on top of this, and I want to use Planar Mapping to put the texture on. And I'm going to hold down the space bar, and I'll go to UV, Planar Mapping, and I'll bring up the Planar Mapping, and with it set for Y, I will hit Apply. And now you'll see a red circle in your UV editor. I'll drag that out from the upper right hand corner, hit the scale tool, and I'll reduce that considerably in scale. I'll come back to my viewport, return to my object mode, and shift select all four of these elements now. Now I'm going to go into the UV editor, right click on the circle, choose Shell, select it, hit W, and drag it into the corner of the UV editor. Now we're ready to export this as a PNG to be used in Photoshop to create our texture. I'll go to my viewport, and once again I'm going to return to the object mode for my geometry. I'll shift select these four components, four model pieces, and I'll go to polygons inside the UV editor, and the very last choice is UV snapshot. In there I will direct my folder to where I would like it to go, and then in the UV snapshot editing window I will change the size from the default 256 to 1024 by 1024, and I will change the image format to a PNG and click OK. The next step will be to go into Photoshop and create the texture that we want on our rocket.